A reading from the first book of Kings. When Solomon was old, his wives had turned his heart to strange gods, and his heart was not entirely with the Lord his God, as the heart of his father David had been. By adoring Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the idol of the Ammonites, Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not follow him unreservedly, as his father David had done. Solomon then built a high place to Chemosh, the idol of Moab, and to Moloch, the idol of the Ammonites, on the hill opposite of Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. The Lord therefore became angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. For though the Lord had forbidden him this very act of following strange gods, Solomon had not obeyed him. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is what you want, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I enjoined on you, I will deprive you of the kingdom and give it to your servant. I will not do this during your lifetime, however, for the sake of your father David. It is your son whom I will deprive. Nor will I take away the whole kingdom. I will leave your son one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and of one Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Verbum Domini. Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people.
Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people.
Blessed are they who observe what is right, who do always what is just. Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people. Visit us with your saving help.
Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people.
But they mingled with the nations and learned their works. They served their idols, which became a snare for them.
Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people.
They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons, and the Lord grew angry with his people and abhorred his inheritance.
Remember us, O Lord, as you favor your people.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia. Humbly welcome the word that has been planted in you and is able to save your souls. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Marcum.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
Jesus went to the district of Tyre and entered a house and wanted no one to know about it, but he could not escape notice. Soon a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him. She came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to drive the demon out of her daughter. She said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She replied, and said to him, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps. Then he said to her, for saying this, you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter. When the woman went home, she found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Verbum Domini. The saint who we honor today, Saint Josephine Bakhita, is a model in the truest sense of Christian emancipation. That is, Christian liberation, Christian freedom, authentic freedom. She experienced in her own life many horrible crimes and injustice, but in the face of such wickedness, where one might be tempted to lose all hope, she gives us a model of Christian hope, persevering hope. And she is a testament of suffering before the resurrection. St. Josephine Bakhita was born in a small village in the Darfur region of Sudan. She was born to a very wealthy family. Her uncle was a tribal chief, and she recalls being very happy, very content, because she had the warmth of family growing up, and she did not experience any suffering in her early life. But all of that would radically change when she was around the age of 7. The exact date of her birth is not known because of her tragic kidnapping. And so traumatic the experience that she did not even remember her name, the name that she was given by her parents. Her kidnappers named her Bakhita, which means fortunate in Arabic. Historians that have studied her life say that around 1877, she was kidnapped by Arab slave traders and then forced to walk about 600 miles to the slave market. Now think, a 7-year-old walking 600 miles. 7 years old, walking 600 miles to a slave market. For the next 12 years of her life, she was bought and sold and given away many times. The amount of abuse that she endured was horrendous. She was tortured by various different slave owners that beat her. They cut her and branded her during her teenage years. She knew nothing about Christianity at this time, but she was certainly enduring it, you could say. There was a preparation for her receiving the gospel in her very suffering. She told the story later of how one of her quote-unquote masters, a slave owner and a Turkish general, gave her to his wife and mother-in-law, who would beat her daily. She said as soon as one wound would heal, they would inflict another. Josephine remembered how the general's wife ordered her to be scarred. They drew patterns on her skin with flour and then cut into her flesh with a blade. Then salt was rubbed on her wounds to make them permanent. During this time, she suffered 144 scars, she says. In 1882, she was brought by an Italian merchant for the Italian consul Callisto Lagnini, who would later give her to a friend of the family, Augusto Michaeli, who brought her to Italy as a nanny to her daughter. And it was in these Italian families where she experienced true dignity and that she was never mistreated. It was through this family that she discovered the crucified Christ. Through a very small gift that was given to her, a silver pendant with a crucifix on it. And she explained that by looking at this crucifix, looking at the crucified Christ, she explained that something happened in her soul that she could not explain. She had this, we can say, a self-identification. Somebody that experienced what she experienced all the way up to these years of being rejected, being sold into slavery, being mocked. She experienced what this man on the cross experienced, and she could not explain it. She would say that this was her very first introduction to Jesus Christ, and she says the quote-unquote good master. The good master, she would call him. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI wrote in his encyclical letter Spe Salvi, which I recommend everybody read. It's a brilliant exposition on Christian hope, on what it means to have hope in the midst of suffering. Spe Salvi. And this is in the very beginning of that encyclical letter. He says, quote, "Hereafter terrifying, quote-unquote, masters who had owned her up to that point, Bikita came to know a totally different kind of quote-unquote master. In the Venetian dialect, which she was now learning, she used the name Paron, P-A-R-O-N, Paron. She used that name for the living God, the God of Jesus Christ. Up to that time, she had known only masters who despised and maltreated her, or at best considered her a useful slave. Now, however, she heard that there was a Paron, P-A-R-O-N, above all masters, the Lord of Lords, and that this Lord is good, goodness in person. She came to know that this Lord even knew her, that he created her, and that he actually loved her, this master. She too was loved, and by none other than the supreme, capital P, Paron, before whom all other masters are themselves no more than lowly servants. Pope Benedict says, she was known and loved, and she was awaited. And this is a striking point that the Pope brings up. He says, what is more, this master, capital M, master, the Lord Jesus, this master had himself accepted the destiny of being flogged. This master had himself accepted the destiny of being flogged. This is her identification with Jesus Christ, with the God-man, with the suffering of Jesus Christ. That suffering is truly, in every sense of the word, redemptive. and now he was awaiting for her at the Father's right hand. The Pope says, now she had hope. Now she had hope, a real Christian hope. Now no longer simply the modest hope of finding masters who would be less cruel. I think that was a profound statement. Throughout her life, masters were incredibly cruel to her, would beat her, and she would hope to find a master that would not be so cruel. But that wasn't yet Christian hope. This hope of hers, which was certainly a good hope, would be purified, we can say, put through the crucible and even more transformed into Christian hope. Again, she had hope, no longer simply modest hope of finding masters who would be less cruel, but the great hope that she says, I am definitively loved, and whatever happens to me, I am awaited by his love. And so my life is good. Through the knowledge of this hope, she was redeemed, no longer a slave, but a free child of God, experiencing true freedom, true liberation. On the occasion of her canonization, Pope St. John Paul II says, she came to understand the profound truth that God and not man is the true master of every human being. That God is the master. God is the master of every human life. The Pope says this experience became the source of such great wisdom for this truly humble daughter of Africa. Pope John Paul continues, he says, in today's world, countless women continue to be victimized, even in developed modern societies. St. Josephine Bakhita, in her life, we find a shining advocate again of what it means to be truly emancipated, genuine, a Christian emancipation, to be liberated. The history of her life inspires not passive acceptance, but the firm resolve to work effectively to free girls and women from oppressive violence and to return them to their dignity in the exercise of their full rights. Human trafficking is an atrocity. It's happening all over the world. And it's something that needs to be brought to the eyes of the public, of that this is a reality. That many people in the world today are suffering from this. St. Josephine Bakhita is the first saint of Sudan, and she is now the patron saint of all those that are suffering from human trafficking. These words of Pope St. John Paul II, words that he spoke 18 years ago, still ring true today. He says, my thoughts turn to this new saint's country, that is Africa, Sudan, which has been torn by a cruel war for the past 17 years. We can say even longer now. With little sign of solution in sight. The Pope says, in the name of suffering humanity, I appeal once more to those with responsibility. He says, open your hearts to the cries of millions of innocent victims and embrace the path of negotiation. I plead with the international community, he says, do not continue to ignore this immense human tragedy. The Pope says, I invite the whole Church to invoke the intercession of Saint Bakita among all our persecuted and enslaved brothers and sisters, especially in Africa and in her native Sudan, that they may know reconciliation and peace. Again, that they might know true Christian emancipation, true Christian freedom. Saint Josephine Bakita, pray for us.